David Rothkopf, who heads the Foreign Policy magazine group and the author of several books, including his newest, National Insecurity, American Leadership in an Age of Fear. Mr. Rothkopf, are we living in an age of fear when it comes to foreign policy?
Well, I think we have been since 9/11. I think that was kind of a body blow to the United States. It gave us a sense of vulnerability we hadn't had perhaps ever. You know, we feared the Cold War, but most of the times that we had a threat in the past, it seemed remote. When we had been attacked, as in Pearl Harbor, people read about it in the newspaper. They processed it through their cerebral cortex, you know. When you look at things on television, and everybody looked at what happened in 9/11 on television, it hits you in the gut. And I think all of a sudden there was this national sense of vulnerability, and it was compounded by politicians and others capitalizing on it. We sort of played into the hands of terrorists by saying, you know, this is the great threat. We reordered a whole national security process that once was focused on the Cold War, and we focused it on terrorists, essentially a few hundred people living in caves in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And from there, the threats build. And it was compounded. It was compounded by the financial crisis. It's been compounded by things like Ebola. We have a sense of vulnerability that we haven't had as a country in a long, long time.
Okay, you write in your book about September 11th itself. You're sitting at a restaurant in Washington with a couple of folks, including Susan Rice. Did you have those thoughts at that point that, oh my God, we can't react this way, we have to think about this, we can't focus our foreign policy?
Yeah, no. As it happens, I did. In fact, I wrote a column about 2 weeks after 9/11 for USA Today, in which I said it's dangerous to fall into the trap of overreaction, or we'll end up having a kind of global intifada, you know, which is the confrontation that they've had in Israel, where you have the powerful Israeli army responding to kids in the street throwing rocks. And it was bad for the Israeli army, and it's bad for the United States. And I think what's happened is we've gone in through overreaction, through the war in Iraq, through some of the other measures, we've actually seen a proliferation of terror. And by the calculation of the State Department right now, there are more terrorists in more places, committing more acts with more casualties than there have been in any time in history right now.
America's role in the world, U.S. foreign policy, that's our topic. Our guest, David Rothkopf, author of several books, and he's CEO and editor of the FP Group, which publishes Foreign Policy magazine. That's among many other things that he does, and we'll let him tell you in just a minute. 202 is the area code, 585-3890 if you live in the East and Central time zones, 585-3891 for those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. What was the reaction to that column that you wrote? Was it pretty strongly anti, just because we were in an emotional time?
To be honest with you, I don't remember. I think the general mood of the moment, however, suggested that we wanted revenge, we wanted to get back in. And I think what President Bush did initially, which is saying he was going to go into Afghanistan and go after the perpetrators of the attack, was what any president would have done. It was when his advisors, in a kind of broken national security system, guided him towards Iraq, guided him towards a war, which we later learned took place for no reason, against an enemy that had nothing to do with the attacks, that drew us into destabilizing the region and creating conflicts and crises that we're still fighting today. I mean, it's 13 years later, and we are still in there, now in Iraq, adding more troops in Iraq against new terrorist foes in Iraq. And I think it's fair to say that we might not have been doing that if we hadn't have made this mistake in Iraq back in 2001, 2, 3.
In National Insecurity, you also write about the issue of perspective, that because of our polarized Washington, our polarized political situation, that we don't get the benefit of perspective.
Washington's broken. I mean, it's broken in a lot of ways. You know, it's broken in terms of campaign finance. It's broken because incumbents are the only people who end up with their jobs. We re-elect more incumbents to the Congress than the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union did during the Soviet era. But it's mostly broken right now because the debate is so polarized that everybody, you know, sort of goes into their clubs. They view the other side as the enemy. They attack before they even stop to process. And one of the things I tried to do in the book, I went to 50 or 60 people from the Bush administration, 50 or 60 people from the Obama administration, and what I tried to do was have them tell it in their own words. And one of the things you find out when you talk to these people is most of the people who do national security work for the U.S. government, Republican or Democrat, are good people. And it allows you to strip things away, and instead of looking at it through a political lens, you look at it through the lens of what's working, what's not working, how did we get into the messes we got into. And I think, you know, if you look back at the past 11, 12, 13, 14 years, this is not going to be a golden age for U.S. foreign policy. History will never look back at Barack Obama or George Bush and say, these were extremely successful foreign policy presidents. If we want to break out of this period where we've been in real troubles under both a Republican and a Democratic president, we do have to strip away that political view. We have to look at it in terms of what's working, what's not working, and that's what I tried to do in the book.